Imagine getting arrested for collecting rainwater in your own backyard, or facing criminal charges for feeding someone else's parking meter. Sounds absurd, right? Yet these everyday American activities could land you in serious legal trouble in Australia. I'm talking about two modern democracies, close allies with shared language and cultural roots, but with surprisingly different approaches to what's legal and what's not. Over the next 9 minutes, we'll explore 11 common American behaviors that could get you arrested down under, revealing how laws reflect deeper cultural values about freedom, safety, and community responsibility. If you're curious about how laws shape daily life around the world, hit that subscribe button. We're breaking down global differences that challenge what you think you know about freedom. Let's dive in. Rainwater collection. Who owns the rain? Let's start with something that seems completely innocuous. Catching rainwater. In many U.S. states, particularly in the water-conscious West, homeowners install rain barrels and collection systems freely. Some states even offer tax incentives for rainwater harvesting. But in Australia, this could get you in trouble. Take Marcus, a homeowner in Melbourne who installed what he thought was an eco-friendly rainwater tank in 2022. He was hit with a $1,500 fine, not because rainwater collection is illegal per se, but because he didn't have the proper permits, and his system wasn't connected to stormwater management infrastructure as required. Here's what most people don't realize. Australia's water regulations are incredibly complex, varying by state and rooted in decades of water scarcity management. The Murray-Darling Basin crisis of the early 2000s, where over-extraction nearly destroyed Australia's largest river system, fundamentally changed how Australians view water rights. Queensland alone has 47 specific requirements for rainwater tank installation, covering everything from tank capacity to plumbing standards to how collected water connects with municipal systems. The key insight: Australia treats water as a communal resource requiring active management. While American law typically emphasizes property rights, what falls on your land is yours to use. Neither approach is wrong. They simply prioritize different values shaped by different environmental challenges. But water isn't the only resource Australia regulates more strictly than America. Self-defense tools, protection or prohibited weapons. In most U.S. states, carrying pepper spray is legal and considered a basic personal safety tool. Millions of Americans, particularly women, carry it without a second thought. Not in Australia. A tourist from California learned this the hard way in 2021 when she was detained at Brisbane Airport. She'd packed pepper spray in her checked luggage, perfectly legal in her home state. Australian customs officers discovered it, and she faced potential criminal charges. Under Australian Weapons Acts, which vary by state but are consistently strict, pepper spray is classified as a Schedule I prohibited weapon, in the same category as knuckle dusters and tasers. Possession can carry up to 2 years imprisonment. And here's the crucial part. Self-defense isn't considered a lawful excuse for carrying it. A 2019 Australian Institute of Criminology report explains the philosophy. Strict weapon controls aim to prevent escalation of violence and reduce weapon availability across the board. Australia's lower rates of violent crime and near absence of gun violence are often attributed to this approach, which began in earnest after the 1996 Port Arthur massacre led to comprehensive gun law reform. Americans might see this as government overreach into personal safety. Australians generally view it as collective security that works. Their homicide rate is roughly 1/5 that of the United States, according to 2023 United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime data. This protective regulatory approach extends beyond just personal safety items. Parking meter kindness. Good deed or legal violation. Here's something that sounds straight out of a bureaucratic nightmare. In certain Australian cities, you can be fined for feeding someone else's parking meter. In America, adding coins to a stranger's expired meter is considered a random act of kindness. People do it without thinking, maybe leaving a note saying, "Pay it forward." But in parts of Sydney and Melbourne, Good Samaritans have received fines up to $110 for this exact behavior. Why? Local council bylaws prohibit meter feeding because it interferes with parking turnover enforcement. These regulations are designed to ensure that parking spaces in high-demand commercial zones actually turn over, giving more people access and supporting local businesses. From an urban planning perspective, it makes sense. Parking management is about efficient resource allocation in crowded city centers. From a community courtesy perspective, it feels absurdly rigid. A 2022 Sydney City Council report noted that parking fine revenue contributes significantly to public infrastructure maintenance, and strict enforcement, including meter feeding prohibitions, ensures compliance. The regulation prioritizes systemic urban management over individual acts of generosity. What this reveals is a broader pattern. Australian governance tends toward regulatory solutions for collective challenges, even when it means limiting individual discretionary action. Speaking of community interactions, here's where American street culture could land you in trouble. Street performance, entertainment, or unlicensed commerce. In most American cities, street performers set up anywhere there's foot traffic: Times Square, the Las Vegas Strip, boardwalks across the country. While some cities require permits, enforcement is generally lax. Australia takes busking much more seriously. An American guitarist visiting Melbourne set up in a busy shopping district to play for tips, as he'd done in dozens of U.S. cities. Within 30 minutes, Melbourne police stopped him. He was performing without the required $70 annual busking permit. Major Australian cities including Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane require permits, and in some areas, performers must audition or enter a lottery system for designated performance zones. Sydney's City of Sydney busking program, for instance, includes approved pitches, time limits, and noise level requirements. According to a 2021 local government report, these systems emerged from competing demands, supporting arts and cultural vibrancy while managing noise complaints, pedestrian flow, and commercial interests. Melbourne alone has over 600 registered buskers competing for limited premium spots. The takeaway? Australia regulates public space usage more systematically than most U.S. cities, treating street performance as licensed activity rather than protected free expression. It's not about stifling creativity, it's about managing shared public resources through formal systems. Public space regulations also affect something Americans do without thinking twice. Jaywalking, cultural compliance, or arbitrary enforcement. Americans jaywalk constantly. In cities like New York or Los Angeles, crossing mid-block when there's no traffic is so common it's barely noticed. Police rarely enforce jaywalking laws. Australia is different. A tourist received a $238 fine in Sydney for crossing an empty street mid-block during a quiet afternoon. No cars in sight, no safety risk, but the law was clear and the officer was watching. Australian states actively enforce jaywalking with fines ranging from $76 in some areas to $238 in New South Wales. Transport for NSW data shows that over 5,000 jaywalking fines are issued annually, and the numbers have been increasing with dedicated enforcement campaigns. Why the difference? A 2020 Pedestrian Council of Australia study suggests it reflects broader cultural attitudes toward rule compliance. Australian society generally shows higher trust in regulatory authority and lower tolerance for informal rule-breaking, even in seemingly minor matters. There's also a genuine safety component. Australia's pedestrian death rate, while low by global standards, has prompted increased enforcement of crossing regulations, particularly in high-traffic areas and around public transport. What Americans might see as freedom of movement, Australians frame as structured safety, and the cultural expectation is that you follow the rules even when they seem unnecessary in the moment. Transportation laws reveal even more surprising differences. Driver's licenses. International recognition isn't automatic. Americans often assume that driver's licenses work internationally, especially in English-speaking countries. Many U.S. tourists drive abroad on American licenses without issue for a while. An American expatriate working in Sydney found out the hard way that, for a while, has a definite endpoint. He'd been driving on his international driving permit for 5 months when he was pulled over for a routine traffic stop. The officer informed him his permit was only valid for 3 months, and he was now driving without proper authorization. The result? A $1,200 fine, demerit points, and his rental car was impounded. Each Australian state requires foreign license holders to obtain local licenses within 3 to 6 months of residency. The process involves written tests and, depending on your home country, potentially a driving test as well. Driving without proper authorization can result in fines up to $2,200 plus vehicle impoundment. According to Transport for NSW, these requirements stem from ensuring drivers understand local road rules, which differ significantly from American standards, including roundabout navigation, hook turns in Melbourne, and different right-of-way rules. The broader point: license reciprocity isn't automatic, even between allied nations with similar infrastructure. Each country maintains sovereignty over who's authorized to use their roads. But it's not just about what you drive, it's about what you carry. Medications. Prescription doesn't mean permitted. For Americans managing ADHD, anxiety, or chronic pain, traveling with prescribed medication seems straightforward. Bring your prescription bottle, carry a doctor's note, you're good to go. Not quite. A Chicago businessman traveling to Sydney for a conference brought his 30-day supply of Adderall, legally prescribed by his U.S. doctor, properly bottled with his name on it. At customs, he was detained for hours. Despite having his prescription, he lacked the proper import permits required for controlled substances in Australia. Australia's Therapeutic Goods Administration strictly controls stimulants, opioids, and benzodiazepines. Many medications routinely prescribed in the U.S. require import approval in Australia. Travelers need a doctor's letter, prescription copy, and potentially advance import approval for quantities exceeding immediate personal use. This isn't just bureaucracy. Different countries use different drug scheduling systems. What's Schedule 2 in the U.S., available by prescription, might be Schedule 8 in Australia, tightly controlled. A 2023 TGA review noted increasing incidence of travelers detained over medication misunderstandings, particularly with ADHD stimulants and anxiety medications. The practical insight: never assume your prescription is internationally recognized. Check destination country requirements weeks before travel. Obtain necessary documentation, and carry only what you need. Medical differences extend beyond prescriptions to everyday entrepreneurial activities. Home-based food businesses, cottage industry, or health violation. The cottage food movement has exploded in America. 31 states have cottage food laws allowing home bakers to sell cookies, jams, and baked goods directly to consumers without commercial kitchen licensing, as long as they follow labeling and sales limit rules. In Perth, a home baker built a thriving social media business selling artisan cookies. Orders poured in, customers loved her products. Everything seemed perfect, until health inspectors shut her down. Without commercial kitchen certification, she was operating an unregistered food business, subject to fines up to $13,320. Australia's Food Standards Code requires commercial food licensing regardless of scale. There are no cottage food exemptions. If you're selling food, you need proper facilities, health department inspections, and regulatory compliance, whether you're selling to 2 people or 2,000. A 2022 Food Standards Australia and New Zealand report emphasized that these regulations protect public health by ensuring all commercial food preparation meets safety standards. The absence of exemptions reflects a different risk tolerance. Australia prioritizes institutional food safety control over entrepreneurial flexibility. Americans might see this as killing small business opportunity. Australians see it as preventing potential foodborne illness outbreaks by maintaining consistent standards. Neither system has eliminated food safety issues, but they reveal fundamentally different approaches to balancing innovation with regulation. Entrepreneurial restrictions appear in unexpected areas, including emerging technology, drone operation, hobby activity, or aviation licensing. In the U.S., recreational drone flying is relatively straightforward. Register drones over 250 grams, follow basic safety rules, and you're generally fine. Commercial use requires Part 107 certification, but many Americans fly drones casually without complications. An American photographer visiting Sydney wanted to capture sunrise footage at Bondi Beach. He launched his drone, started filming the stunning coastline, and was quickly approached by officers. The result: an $1,100 fine. The issue? He was posting the footage to his Instagram, where he occasionally earns ad revenue. That made it commercial use, requiring a remote pilot license from Australia's Civil Aviation Safety Authority. Even without revenue, recreational drone use over 250 grams requires registration, and flying near people or in controlled airspace, like many popular tourist spots, is strictly prohibited. CASA's 2023 compliance data shows increasing enforcement, with thousands of fines issued for unlicensed operation. The regulations are comprehensive. Altitude limits, distance from people, restricted zones, notification requirements for certain areas. Australia treats drones with a level of aviation oversight similar to manned aircraft, reflecting a broader regulatory philosophy that new technologies should be strictly controlled until proven safe, rather than permitted until proven dangerous. Technology regulations continue with digital activities Americans take for granted. VPN use, privacy tool or copyright circumvention. Many Americans use VPNs to access streaming content from other regions, watching UK Netflix shows or Australian sports broadcasts not available in the US. It's technically against streaming services' terms of service, but there's minimal enforcement or legal consequence. In Australia, this exists in a much grayer legal zone. While VPN use itself isn't illegal, the 2018 Copyright Amendment Act strengthened penalties for circumventing geoblocks to access copyrighted content. Australian ISPs are required to block known piracy sites, and using technological measures to access geo-restricted licensed content could potentially violate copyright law. A 2021 Australian government intellectual property enforcement report noted increasing focus on digital copyright circumvention, though prosecution of individual VPN users for streaming access remains rare. The legal risk primarily affects service providers, not individual users, but the legislation creates ambiguity that doesn't exist in US law. The context matters. Australia's smaller market means content licensing works differently. Studios often license Australian rights separately, and earlier release windows in Australia for some content means preventing circumvention protects licensing revenue. What Americans view as accessing legally licensed content they're paying for, Australian law sometimes treats as circumventing territorial licensing agreements, revealing how digital borderlessness conflicts with traditional content distribution models. Finally, one of the most fundamental differences involves something Americans consider a constitutional right. Speech limitations. First Amendment doesn't travel. Americans are accustomed to broad free speech protections. The First Amendment means you can say almost anything, short of direct threats or incitement, without government penalty. Offensive speech, controversial opinions, even hate speech are generally protected. Australia has no First Amendment equivalent. Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act makes it unlawful to do an act that's reasonably likely to offend, insult, humiliate, or intimidate someone based on race or ethnicity. While Section 18D provides exemptions for artistic work, academic discussion, and public interest debate, the baseline is fundamentally different. American commentators visiting Australia have been warned about Section 18C after making remarks that would be fully protected speech in the US. Defamation laws are also stronger in Australia. Truth alone isn't always sufficient defense, and the burden of proof often falls differently than in US libel law. A 2019 Australian Human Rights Commission analysis noted ongoing debate about where to draw lines between preventing racial vilification and protecting robust political speech. The High Court of Australia recognizes an implied constitutional freedom of political communication, but it's narrower than explicit First Amendment protections. This reveals something crucial. Even democracies with shared values can define freedom fundamentally differently. Australia prioritizes protection from harm and vilification. America prioritizes marketplace of ideas and individual expression. Both systems aim for justice through different frameworks. These differences reveal something essential about governance and cultural values. Australia and America are both prosperous democracies with rule of law, protected rights, and high living standards. Yet their legal systems reflect starkly different priorities. Australia tends toward collective safety, resource management, and comprehensive regulatory oversight. It's a country shaped by harsh environmental realities, water scarcity, isolation, the need for tight-knit community cooperation. Its regulations often prioritize systemic management and protection from harm, even when that means limiting individual discretion. America emphasizes individual liberty, entrepreneurial freedom, and constitutional rights protection. It's a nation built on frontier expansion and immigrant reinvention, with cultural narratives celebrating self-reliance and suspicion of government overreach. Its legal system protects individual choice, even when that creates inefficiency or risk. Neither approach is inherently superior. Australia's tight regulations contribute to lower violent crime, better environmental management in some areas, and arguably greater social cohesion. America's expansive freedoms foster innovation, entrepreneurial dynamism, and robust political discourse. Understanding these differences helps us appreciate that democracy isn't a single formula. It's a set of values that different societies balance according to their unique histories, challenges, and cultural priorities. So here's my question for you. Given what we've explored today, which approach do you think better balances individual freedom with community well-being? Are there specific examples where you'd prefer one system over the other? I'm genuinely curious about your perspective. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button for daily deep dives into different societies' issues around the world. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.